I beg your pardon, I was going to come to May in a moment, but there is obviously only a couple more days until we reach the May bank holiday weekend, and normally that would be cause for good cheer. We're going to have a little holiday, we're going to have an extended weekend, it's going to be great. But if you were hoping for good news and you were looking at the newspapers today, you would not find it. The political scene across the UK generally and here in Scotland is stagnant. There's nothing much happening, and I think it's important to remember, as somebody pointed out, and I think it was Vlad Vexler, who's a political philosopher, that the leader of the UK, Sir Keir Starmer, isn't actually a politician by training. Far from it. He was originally a lawyer, like so many politicians are these days, and essentially he spent his life as a civil servant, serving the UK as the Attorney General. Now you might think, well, that's great, that's quite a high position, but Keir Starmer, you may have noticed this from listening to him and watching him when he's giving speeches or talking on the media, he's pretty dull, he's pretty boring. He makes John Major look like a rainbow by comparison. He is effectively a civil service functionary who has achieved power but now knows nothing about what to do with it. He doesn't know how to be a prime minister, far less even a politician. And his joining the Labour Party seems to be, or really what Starmer is doing is he's disaster managing. He makes decisions one at a time. In fact, he's even quoted as saying that in his political life, he makes one decision after another, but sees no connection between the things he's deciding. He has no plan, no vision. He cannot see a larger future which he can plan for. And so we're condemned to live from crisis to crisis with Keir Starmer reacting to things that happen to him. Now, sadly, in Scotland, the same thing has happened, but in a different way. John Swinney, as the leader of the SNP and as the First Minister, is also very much in the managerial role and is managing the day-to-day humdrum events in the Scottish Parliament, and that's generally characterised by the strange things that he does. He'll go and stand being photographed in front of things, for example, or he will make legislation on things which are really not that influential and not that important to the vast majority of the people. However, to get back to the point, there was an article published, I believe it was yesterday, written by Jerry Hassan. Now, this article was brought to my attention by Kevin Gibney of Independence Live, the TV channel. And he said to me, read this, it's pretty depressing, and tell me what you think. And actually, to be fair to Jerry Hassan, it's a pretty accurate, if depressing, picture of the political scene in Scotland right now. It's a scene of decline and a scene of inaction and inactivity. The issue of independence, in terms of how the voters view it, is well down their priority list, simply because they're now lumbered with the enormous financial burden of gigantic energy prices, lack of housing, the affordability of housing, and the difficulty in finding a secure job, which I will return to shortly. Having read Jerry's article, yeah, it is depressing, but it reminded me of something, and that is, it's always darkest just before the dawn. And I don't think things could get an awful lot worse politically in Scotland than they already are. And as far as I can see, I tend to agree with Jerry on this, that the political parties of Scotland, especially the nominally pro-independence ones, are not brilliantly inspiring to the voters. They seem rather bland, don't seem to want to mention the I word, that is independence, or as I prefer to call it, liberation now, because independence is such a hackneyed term, it's lost the whole meaning. But there are ways in which things can be moved on. Now, in the last few episodes that I've done of this programme, and also on the Hod Majakit show with Norrie Hunter, I've been trying to instill an anger in people about the way they have been treated by their political leaders and the inactivity that characterises everything around us at the moment, the lack of any progress, the lack of basic maintenance of the public infrastructure of our towns and cities and roads and railways, our ferries. Everything has basically been defunded, mainly by London shortchanging Holyrood, but also by some pretty bad mismanagement in the past by the SNP of things which should have been relatively simple to do, but turned out to be a bit of a disaster. But what's the answer to all of this? Well, I think in 2026, we're faced with a choice of who to vote for in our general election. And I think the one thing that I'm thinking of is I'm looking for people who are dynamic, who stand out from the crowd, and who have a vision of what Scotland should be. Not mindless drones who just want to get elected and say all the same usual platitudes that everybody says when they're trying to get elected. So I'm hoping, maybe forlornly, that a few of these individuals will rise to the surface amid a sea of mediocrity, unfortunately, in the political sort of paddling pool that Scotland inhabits. But if they do, we're looking for candidates who are prepared to take difficult choices. The kind of choices I'm talking about would be, let us say, just for argument's sake, this is a hypothetical, that an SNP government is returned with a majority, but also perhaps with the assistance of MSPs from other pro-independence parties, perhaps from the ISP and ALPA. But I don't think many Greens will be there, but you never know. But what I'm saying here is that I would hope that those new individuals that we voted for, who we think have got a vision of the future, can put enough pressure on government to do some legislating. And I'm talking about legislating, first of all, for a new Scottish tax office to be reopened, and also for a new Scottish Treasury to be established. These two institutions, which you might think would be heavily resisted by the UK, could easily be sold to the UK and everybody else on the basis that they will make things much more accurate, they will be more efficient, and the Scottish Government will be able to keep track of where its taxation actually is at any time. Now that means taking taxes locally, as we used to do, and then sorting out which of the taxation is to go to London and which is to remain here, and putting it into the Treasury so that some of it at least can be earmarked for particular purposes. That would make it possible for the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to earmark or ring fence money which is made in this way, just from taxation, for certain topics. Now, the most important ones for young people are things like energy costs and housing. These are the two critical things that everybody is worried about. And young people I mentioned particularly today because they are heavily depoliticised. They are so burdened by the lack of a secure future that they can see ahead of them, and the massive energy bills and the severe shortage of appropriate housing for them, that they struggle to see anything other than working their tails off day and night to make ends meet. They don't have the time to engage with something like a liberation cause like this. But if, and this is a big if the Scottish Parliament had the backbone to stand up and defy Westminster and say, we want to help these young people. To do that, we're going to set aside a large amount of our taxation and specifically aim it at providing them with social housing, which we will organise and we will have constructed in places where it's needed so those young people can afford the rents or even to buy these properties. Secondly, we want to legislate so that a percentage of all of our energy that is supplied to commercial premises in homes across Scotland, that percentage, which is used internally in Scotland, be taken under the control of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government in particular, and legislate so that the energy corporations have to sell that energy at a fixed price to the Scottish Government so that it can be then sold on to the people who then get it. And that would guarantee a low price because the Scottish Parliament or the Scottish Government could insist that there be a low ceiling, a low price cap on all domestic energy in exchange for a negotiated rate on any exported energy. So we can play off one against the other, but the first thing we need to do to secure Scotland so it's ready for liberation is have that energy at an affordable price and housing which is appropriate to the needs of young working people who are struggling at the moment to find anywhere to live Most of them are living in multiple occupancy flats with other young people. They have no privacy, they can't have a social life, and they have got virtually no disposable income left with which to enjoy their lives, particularly the weekends. So that's what I think should be done. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea of the UK state, and I think this is happening partly by accident and partly by design, is to keep people as poor as possible. You'll remember Sir Keir Starmer well before the election promising that Labour would lower energy prices, promising that they would not cut benefits, promising all sorts of things that people wanted to hear. Now, as soon as Sir Keir Starmer gets into power, he does the exact opposite. He's increased the amount of the energy caps, so the energy companies can extract huge profits from people who are already impoverished and living just at the margins of sustainability. They can barely survive. Keir Starmer thinks this is fine. He is completely insulated from that. He's led a privileged, entitled life. He's never wanted for anything, despite him constantly mentioning his father was a toolmaker, which is absolutely of no relevance whatsoever here. Starmer lives in an ivory tower, in a bubble. He doesn't care. Even John Swinney, in his lofty perch in Holyrood, is largely immune from the effects of the way the UK government behaves, and also from, shall we say, the shortcomings of the Scottish government as well, as it has been for the last 10 to 15 years. However, we need somebody with a backbone. I don't think Swinney is the man to lead such a charge and establish, first of all, a tax office in Scotland which will take Scottish taxes only and will then appropriate the right amounts to do what is actually needed in Scotland. Now, remember that taxation is not just about income tax. There are taxes on oil revenue, there are taxes on energy corporations, there are taxes on all businesses as well, and all of these should be under the control of the Scottish Parliament, and yet they're not. Legislating for this is obviously going to create a major crisis between the Scottish Parliament and the English Parliament in Westminster, and so it should. But that's what Defiance is about. It's about looking after your own people first, and then dealing with the rest of the world afterwards. You have to make sure, as a government minister, that you're protecting the people who voted for you. Those that you represent are relying on you to make sure that they have a life which is worth living and don't have their benefits cut. They don't have their energy prices raised artificially by a UK government which only cares about the profits of corporations. So what I'm saying here is we need backbone. The people are ready for this, and I think from the comments I've seen on all my shows recently, everybody wants their politicians to do something. If you remember my last Hot My Jacket edition with Norrie Hunter, one of the things he said out loud, and I mean he really shouted it, was, "Do something, Swinney." And that is essentially what we are saying here. These new politicians need to do something. Don't just sit there, get on with it, take the difficult decisions, and defy Westminster. That's your role. That's why you're elected. You're there to make sure that the people of Scotland are safe, that they are secure financially, and that they have enough money, disposable income left over after paying their bills to have some kind of life. Because the drudgery of working your ass off day in and day out and never being able to enjoy any of the fruits of your labour because they're all sucked out of your pockets by energy companies is no life at all. So the energy companies need to be brought to heel, and that's going to require some very bold and some extremely courageous people in government to make it happen. And even if it causes problems for the energy corporations and for the British government, so much the better. It's time something was done, because we can't go on like this. The UK is in terminal decline, and it's dragging us down with it and frittering away all of the resources which we've had for these past 60 years to try and maintain a failing state. Why should we go down with the ship? We didn't design this system. We didn't deindustrialise our own country. That was done by a Tory government of Margaret Thatcher, and that process has continued to this day, despite the best efforts of our own Scottish industrialists who are trying their best to expand manufacturing businesses, but being stymied all the time by massive energy costs. When these energy costs are reduced and the energy corporations are forced to cap them at a level people can afford and at which businesses can expand and hire more people, then we'll have some vestige of control. And that can happen even before we liberate ourselves from the United Kingdom. In fact, it should happen before. People need to feel safe before they take that step of leaving the UK, not afterwards. And that really is the message. We need to do the groundwork now, and I don't mean just you and I, we're voters, but we need to say these things to the candidates standing in our constituencies. What are you going to do if you get elected about these issues I have raised with you? Housing for young people, an energy cap for everybody, especially developing businesses, so that the economy can grow and more people will be employed, and there will be a future for those young people. They are the future of the country. And if you're doing nothing for them, you're essentially presiding over the gradual decline and death of our own state, and that is just not good enough. Anyway, I will leave you with those rather strident thoughts and opinions, but something needs to give, and politicians need to wake up and start listening to people who are screaming at them to do something right now and to make sure it happens after they're elected, not just go along to get along, not just have a nice cushy career within this British framework of political I think you'd say ivory tower dwelling, where nothing touches you and you're perfectly safe. That's got to end. People have got to start taking their political career seriously and have a vision of what their country should be well before we become liberated. And that's it from Inde-Car today. So please keep the faith, keep watching the programme, and also I look forward to seeing you again on Friday morning at 9:30 when Norrie Hunter will be joining me again for another edition of Pod Majaket. In the meantime, I know a number of you have had trouble with donating to Inde-Car. I've seen a few people having to cancel their recurring payments. It's worth just going back to the links and trying again, because sometimes after a while the payments are basically become worn out, if you like. The system actually stops doing them after a while, so it's necessary sometimes to renew a recurring payment with a direct debit or something like that. So if you're having trouble trying to pay, I'll put up a fresh link after this show. In the meantime, keep the faith, but remember, it's not down to us anymore, it's down to the politicians that we elect, but it's up to us to make sure they're the right ones. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.